Now, as I promised, because I had been going on all of my social media sites for the last couple of days, once everybody had confirmed earlier in the week, I started going on all of my social media sites promoting the show. And I was just telling our next guest, in terms of feedback, my social media sites started lighting up whenever I was sharing that this was going to be a blockbuster doubleheader this morning with Pamela Samuels Young in the 6 o'clock hour and Kimberla Lawson Roby in the 7:30 hour. I had comments such as "can't wait." And this was coming from folks in Florida, folks in Washington, D.C., folks here in the New Jersey area. Folks were hitting me back up saying, folks in the South Carolina area, Kathy Farish, if you're listening, I know you're a big Kimberla Lawson Roby fan. She immediately said, I will be listening. That's one of my mother's oldest and best girlfriends. And as soon as I said Kimberla Lawson Roby, she was right on. If she don't listen to any other show, she's going to listen to this one this morning. So, Kathy, if you're listening, good morning. Lestine Robinson and Barbara Tarpley and Shannon McClinney, and those of you that I can remember that fed back, the names that I can remember, and so many others. Well, Kimberla is on the line with me. And we just finished up with Pamela, and Pamela told me to tell Kimberla hello and thanked her for all her support because she said she's one of her favorite authors as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get right on into it. New York Times and USA Today best-selling author Kimberla Lawson Roby has published 23 novels, which includes Best Friends Forever, The Ultimate Betrayal, A Christmas Prayer, The Prodigal Son, A House Divided, The Perfect Marriage, The Reverend's Wife, Secret Obsession, Love, Honor, and Betray, Be Careful What You Pray For, A Deep, Dark Secret, The Best of Everything, One in a Million, Sin No More, Love and Lies, Changing Faces, The Best Kept Secret, Too Much of a Good Thing, A Taste of Reality, It's a Thin Line, Casting the First Stone, Here and Now, and her debut title, Behind Closed Doors, which was originally self-published through her own company, Lenox Press. She has sold more than 2.7 million copies of her novels, and they have frequented numerous bestseller lists, including New York Times, USA Today, The Washington Post, Publishers Weekly, Essence Magazine, Upscale Magazine, AALBC.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Amazon.com, Walmart, the Dallas Morning News, and the Austin Chronicle, to name just a few. And both Behind Closed Doors and Casting the First Stone were #1 Blackboard bestsellers for 4 consecutive months in both 1997 and 2000. Behind Closed Doors was the #1 Blackboard best-selling book for paperback fiction in 1997. Kimberla is the 2013 NAACP Image Award winner for Outstanding Literary Work Fiction, the recipient of the 2006, 2007, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2013 Author of the Year Female Award presented by the African American Literary Award Show in New York, the recipient of the 2014 AAMBC Award for Female Author of the Year, the recipient of the Blackboard Fiction Book of the Year Award in 2001 for Casting the First Stone, the recipient of the 1998 First Time Author Award from Chicago Black's History Month Book Fair and Conference, and in 2001, Kimberla was inducted into the Rock Valley College Alumni Hall of Fame, Rockford, Illinois. Kimberla's novels deal with very real issues, including corruption within the church. Oh my. Drug addiction, gambling addiction, infidelity, social status, single motherhood, breast cancer, infertility, sibling rivalry and jealousy, domestic violence, sexual abuse, mental illness, caregiving of a parent, racial and gender discrimination in the workplace, sexual harassment, and overweight issues, to name a few. Kimberla resides in Illinois with her husband, Will. Her 24th title, A Sinful Calling, will be released in a couple of days, June 21st, 2016. Kimberla, welcome back to the microphones of the Reading Circle.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I tell you, I am. This is one of those kind of like, I love you, I love you more. I love you, I love you more. No, you appreciate it, but I appreciate it more. This is one of them type deals, only because, like I said, between you and Pamela this morning, in terms of feedback of guests and everything, I mean, just lit the boards up. And then reading both of your bios and knowing that both of you write about social consciousness and issues that are real. both of you are not writing just from the standpoint of entertainment and fun and all. You're really approaching and attacking, as I just, read your litany there, of real issues. And I think that's why the connection is made with so many people. And I know you're dropping your latest one on the 21st, A Sinful Calling. Now, you have it's Curtis, right? That's the Reverend?
It is. It's my 24th book, but it's the 13th in the Reverend Curtis Black series. And now kind of, delving into the area of more of a family saga, because this one actually is written in the voices of his two eldest children, Dylan and Alicia.
Well, it's interesting in terms of, and Pamela and I was just talking about this whole thing in terms of the church. Mm-hmm. I don't know. First off, there's a couple of things going on. One, you have churches that portray this image of there are topics that are taboo that should not be discussed because it's the church, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Then you have the other side of the coin where all these things are happening in the church, whether you talk about them or not, whether they're taboo subjects or not. Truth of the matter is they're happening there. And because you have people who are imperfect, who are coming there. Matter of fact, the church is not, it's not, I'm trying to think how that saying goes, that for the most part, the church is a hospital. That's what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. The people who are sick, that's where they go. All right. Mm-hmm. So when your books start dealing with these issues, so let's talk about, even like, what is it, 20, how many did we say, 23? Let's talk about
24. Yeah.
So you're at the 24th now. Okay, so let's talk about where did this all come from? How did we get started with that? We'll just give a brief history of that and then work our way up to A Sinful Calling.
Well, when I started writing, actually, which, all the way now back in 1995, my first title was Behind Closed Doors. And so at that point, I just knew that I wanted to write a novel. I wanted to write something along the lines of what I like to read, which wasn't just about women's fiction, but about real issues, and not necessarily stories that end with a happy ending, but those that folks can relate to, that either they have gone through it in some point in their lives, or maybe it's a friend or family member, and that was just sort of my thinking. Well, after the book was published, and of course the story, and you know this from a long time ago, getting all of the rejection letters from literary agents and from publishers, and really just preparing to give up, ended up going on and self-publishing it. And so what I heard from readers more often than not by email, and even at some of the events that I did throughout the country, it was exactly what I was hoping for, and it was, I read the book to the end because I could relate to it. Well, I went through what your characters, Karen or Regina, went through, or my sister went through that, or my coworker. And so I decided at that point that I would continue my career along those lines. So that book was about social status, infidelity, and some rivalry going on amongst friends. And then in Here and Now, the second book, it was about infertility issues and single motherhood. And so for the third book, when I was preparing to submit a synopsis to my publisher, I always have to give them an idea of what I'm getting ready to write, I said to my husband, I want this to be something that everyone will relate to, that there won't be a person who won't know this story. Either they will have experienced it, or it's just something they have heard about from someone else or in the headlines. And so he was the one who said, what about all of the issues that tend to go on in churches? And I had never considered that, but knew he was right, at least based on what was going on in so many of the churches here locally. And so from there, I created the Reverend Curtis Black character and who he was about, and the congregation and his family members. And what I knew, unfortunately, was that so many pastors had become consumed with money and power and women, and that it was more about a career decision than it was about a calling from God. And so to me, that's really where a big part of the problem comes in, that Correct. Ministers in many cases have decided to become pastors for the wrong reason, and so they're misleading innocent people. And then I think where we fall short is that we don't hold them accountable, and we start trying to place other human beings on a pedestal who fall short the same as we do. You know, as you said, none of us are perfect people. We're all very, very flawed. We all commit sins. We have to repent. We have to pray about them. But I think that pastors have to be held to at least some sort of a higher standard, because you are supposed to be called by God, and sometimes you're leading very, very hurt and very vulnerable people who are in church for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
And then when they're hurt, they decide they're not coming back again. And that's what makes me, I think, the saddest. That's the most heartbreaking part of what I do as a writer, is to hear someone tell me, this is why I'm not going to church again.
That's absolutely right. And I know in my church, my pastor focuses a lot on that in terms of particularly with our young people, because he's constantly trying to help us understand you could turn a child or a teenager off to God and to church for the rest of their days by something that you do or don't do, or a pretense. I mean, he often shares the story about a young lady who had a child out of wedlock, and all the sisters in the church, you know, didn't offer any support whatsoever. I mean, just kind of like as if to, you know, snubbed, look down, this, that, and the other. But then they started doing the math in terms of marriage certificate and birth certificates, and they weren't adding up. So then it was kind of like, wait a minute, you were in the same situation I was in, but yet you offered no encouragement to say, you know what, hon, I've been there, you'll be fine. It was a mistake. God will bring you through. You know, it's not something that you do it again. But nobody had offered that. So he often shares that story. And a lot of times, because he's been with us now about 17, 18 years, when we first got there, we would have some of the older saints, when a girl or a guy for that matter would do something, make them get up in the front and apologize. He said, well, I'll tell you what, if you get up and apologize for all of your sins, then I'll have them stand alongside you and they can do theirs.
Exactly. And that are so right. We were just talking earlier this week, a friend of mine, because I said, gosh, you know, this is unfortunate, all the judging that you see. And don't get me wrong, it's human nature, I think, to judge certain things, and, you know, if we think people are doing wrong. But what I do know is this: a sin is a sin is a sin, and you don't get to decide that my sin is any worse than the one that you're committing. You just don't have that right to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, and so once he took that on, once he kind of put that position out and took that stance, all of that nonsense stopped in terms of requesting that they stand up in front of the church.
Yes, you shouldn't have to do that. You know, it's between you and God. I'm going to believe that until the end of time, until I'm gone, that, you know, whatever I do, that's between me and God, and he can decide, you know, how to handle that. And he's the one that I really only really have to go to forgiveness. That's the only person I'm really interested in forgiving me when it comes to something like that.
It is true. And again, as I said when I was introducing you, we have kind of give this, and I'm not saying that the churches are running loosey-goosey. That's not what we're talking about. But what we're saying is the issues, the same issues that happen in quote-unquote the world are the same issues that are going on in the church. The difference is, though, how we handle it. The difference is in terms of not repeating. Because we were talking about this in Bible study the other night. There's got to be a reason why somebody in the world says, okay, there's a reason why I would come there. If you're doing the same thing that I'm doing out here, or you react the same way I react, why should I bother coming there with you? Because I don't see any difference.
No, you're very right about that. And we switched churches about 3 years ago from a church that I had been at my entire life. And so that's really what it's about, is I need to know that at least you're trying, you know, that maybe you're a minister, you know, and you're not perfect, but you are at least trying to do the right thing, or you have remorse, or you feel bad about what you're doing. But if I can't sit in the pew on Sunday morning without thinking about what I've heard or what's been said or what's supposed to be going on, you know, that's just not really a good thing. And so I want to be somewhere where I feel like, okay, you know what, nope, we're not perfect. And I hear our pastor say this on Sunday mornings, you know, I'm not a perfect pastor and I'm not a perfect church, but the bottom line is we know that there is some love and some honor and some integrity there when it comes to respecting God.
Absolutely. Are you on? I'm getting some crazy feedback. Are you near the computer or radio or TV or something?
No.
Okay, there we go. Now it went off. Okay, we were getting like some cross feedback. I don't know where it was coming from. It was coming through the airways when you were giving that response. But you're absolutely right. A couple weeks ago, we did an off-Broadway, or I went to see an off-Broadway local play. It was called While You Were Preaching. And the premise was similar to what you're talking about. It was the whole notion of while the pastor was concentrating on the church, his family was falling apart. And he had the same temptations. Matter of fact, it was interesting twists in there in terms of the temptation, because it was temptation from a male and a female.
Oh my God.
It was one of the ushers' sister, I forget her name. She was after him and trying to set him up. And then there was a brother in the church that was on the down low that he ultimately admits throughout the play, I almost fell with brother such and such. I mean, it really but it gave a real interesting insight in terms of what goes on in the church and in the family life of those who lead. And it does happen. And the trick is to try not, as he said, I almost fell with brother, I forget what his name, but he didn't. He said he almost. And ultimately it was one of the I think it was the church mother in the play that she was kind of like, son, I knew all this was going on. It's like, God had given it to her in a dream and a vision. And she was able to really kind of be that voice of conscience for him. And that's how they turned it all back around by the end of the play. But the long and short is, we are people, and you have the opportunity to address these issues again, even though, because I was sharing with Pamela earlier, there's different type of reading. There's reading for entertainment that, we generally do on vacation or at the beach or whatever. And then, of course, if we're in school or whatever, there's reading for information or what have you. But you two kind of you kind of blend those, that it's not just for entertainment. It's also about education. And in your particular case, there's redemptive messages.
Mm-hmm. And that's my goal always when I'm preparing to write a book, while I'm writing it, and of course, when I'm trying to actually get it out and start talking about it to readers once it's on the bookshelf. And that is, as a novelist, of course you hope to entertain. You hope that readers enjoy it enough that they want to keep turning the pages one after another. But you also hope that there is a message that is being learned, that there is this teachable moment, and that people might even be able to take something, if it's just one scene, one paragraph, and say, this is what's going to help me or help somebody that I know and love. And so that will always be my goal, and I do think, that's why I've probably continued to write, because if it weren't for me hearing the feedback from my readers, if they weren't telling me the stories, how they were helped or they learned something or that they enjoyed it or that's the reason they were waiting for the next book, I don't think that I would do it. And I was saying in an interview earlier this week that, of course, as writers, we write because we love it. We have these stories that we want to tell, and we just enjoy it. But for me, I have to be able to know that readers are getting something from it, or it just won't be worth me doing it anymore.
Well, like we said in the earlier interview, if you came out with a book that was more like a documentary or either more like an article or more informative, say, for example, on the issues that you deal with, like I read the litany: corruption within the church, drug addiction, gambling addiction, infidelity, social status, single motherhood, breast cancer, infertility, sibling and jealousy, domestic violence, sexual abuse, mental illness, caregiving of a parent, racial and gender discrimination in the workplace, sexual and overweight issues. If your books were solely just on those topics in and of themselves, probably folks would not pick them up. But the fact that you're embedding those issues within a storyline that people can connect with, you're absolutely right. That's why they keep selling, because we're like, wow, well, that sounds like my church. That sounds like such and such.
Yes, yes. And I've always said that I think it's a little more easy to receive those taboo, controversial, really kind of hard topics that sometimes can be uncomfortable to talk about publicly or even just with a friend or family member. Depending on what it is you're going through, you may not feel that you can speak that out loud to anyone, but yes, in a fictional storyline, it's a lot easier to take, I think.
One of the things, and I remember reading, and I've gotten my books of yours mixed up because I've read several of them. I remember clearly, though, the one about casting the first stone, and I also remember one of the other ones, and I forget which one it was. It was the wife when she finally got fed up. When she finally was fed up with Curtis, and she was kind of like teeter-tottering on kind of like going out doing her own thing.
Mm-hmm. And that was, and I wonder, that may likely be Charlotte, the third wife, although they're still together today. Tables kind of turned between the two of them back and forth, and she became just as bad as he used to be, something he was not counting on.
Right.
So, mm-hmm.
But it gave real good insights into that as well, because, again, we have these images or pedestals, if you will, of the First Lady, the mother of the church, the pastor, the deacon, the trustee, the so forth and so on. But there's these again, I'm always fascinated with the behind the scenes because I know what we see on Sunday morning. Just like, when I watch Obama, I know what we see on camera. But it's like when you really whenever he's done and you start to read the memoirs of what really went on behind closed doors, that's the stuff that really fascinates me. I read about the Clintons and the Kennedys and the yada, yada, yada.
Yes, because we as a people, as a country, we are so caught up in titles, so we think that when people hold certain positions or they're at a certain status, that this is just who they must be. When we just kind of decide that. But, even when we're talking about the church, and I always go back and say, gosh, we have some truly, truly wonderful pastors and ministers and just people in ministry around the country. So I always like to say that because that's true. It's just a matter of you finding who those people are and finding which churches those are, because those are the places you need to be in. But at the same time, instead of more or less worshiping another human being, it's more important to say, let me read the word for myself.
Right.
Let me make sure my own personal relationship with God is intact, and then follow. Let's just go from there. But you need to be doing those two things first and foremost before you even consider trying to put all your faith and trust in another person, again, who falls short the same that you and I or anybody else does.
No, it's absolutely right. Because, again, as pastors and church officers, we are imperfect people trying to lead other imperfect people to perfection. I mean, that's kind of like the bottom line.
Absolutely.
And in terms of worshiping the person, you're absolutely right. Then there's that other dynamic of what you were talking about earlier, and that is those who go into it for the wrong reason. Now, in other words, they really are deceptive. In other words, I went into this as a job. I went into this for the money. I went into it for the title. I went into it for everything except for what really, when you enter ministry, it ought to be a calling like anything else. And it ought to be God's call and sincerity, and not just for all those other things. And you do have those charlatans that do go in there for that. That's where the confusion comes in for a lot of people. Because there's a difference between someone who's gone into it for that motivation versus someone that went into it for the right reason and made a mistake like anybody else.
Yes, it is, very much so. And this book, A Sinful Calling, really speaks to that, because right away in the very, very first few pages of the book, in the first chapter, Dylan is very clear that, he knows that most pastors, or that it was probably more standard for a minister to be called by God to preach, but he wasn't called by God. And he talks about how he called himself, and he wasn't ashamed of it. And he has this plan, and it's working brilliantly, and he wants to be much bigger than his dad ever was, and his goal is to become the most well-known pastor in the city. And he started his church in the center of his living room, now has 1,000-plus members, and is doing all that he can trying to figure out how to get even more than that, and to not only take it national, but to take it worldwide. And so it is about the money. It is about the power and the control and, having all the worldly possessions. And unfortunately, he represents far too many ministers in this country.
It is, and that's where, again, for those quote-unquote in the world, that's where it's some confusion going on in terms of, again, hurting people. In Bible study the other night, we have in my church at a point where it's called fellowship time. For a couple of minutes, everybody gets around and they greet each other and hug and so forth and so on. So one of the brothers was saying how when he first got there, it was fellowship time, and he went to hug somebody and they pushed him away. And he went on to say how that almost kept him from ever coming back again. And what we don't realize is little things that you don't think of, whether the usher at the door, whether they smile or not, whether they greet you and say hello nice. And again, that person might be having a bad day, you never know. But that's just how easy it is to turn somebody out. That they say.
And it is. I've had those moments over the years, which I've been in church my entire life. And it may be just one person. Somebody may join the church new, or it may be somebody you met right when you came to the church, or maybe they've been at the church as long as you, but you never had any interaction with them, but it wasn't pleasant, or they didn't seem like a nice person, or maybe they just seemed like they didn't like you, even though you've never done anything to them because you don't know them that well. But that's in the back of your mind when you leave church that day. And you're thinking about that until that person probably does have a smile or have something good to say. And so people do need to be very, very careful, because if you say that you are a Christian, that you love God, that you love your fellow man, how in the world can you ever make another human being feel that way?
That's right.
Those two things don't go together, Christian and making people feel bad. I don't see how those come together at all.
No, absolutely right. And again, during fellowship time, that is an opportunity, because, again, the pastor he shares a story from one of the other members who's passed away now, who said, Pastor, I need you to understand that during this fellowship time, that's the only hug I get throughout the week.
Oh, my.
That, I don't think you realize you may not think it's that big of a deal, but for me, because it was an older woman that lived alone. She was a senior citizen who lived alone. Mm-hmm. And she said, for me, that's the only hug I get through the week.
Oh, my gosh. And so she needed that.
Yes. And a lot of people just blow it off. It's like, why are we wasting this time? And, I don't want to touch people. But again, we're always singing just as I am, or either come as you are, and so on. And then when people do come just as they are,
well, then it's like, oh, did you see what they had on?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's another one that really gets me. If you want to dress nice for church, then there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a great thing. That's how I was raised up. I actually had just written something, or back and forth with speaking with somebody, because we were talking about, when a lot of us, when we grew up, if you were brought up in the church, there were school clothes, play clothes, and church clothes.
That's right.
That's what I was used to.
Same here.
And to this day, to some degree, I'm still kind of that person, and so that's okay. But also, if the person comes into the church with a pair of jeans and an old T-shirt on, they can sit right next to me. I'm not going to look at them any differently.
Absolutely.
And it bothers me if somebody pays attention, because for me, I may wear the same suit 3 or 4 weeks from now that I just worn, because I don't see why I can't do that. I don't see why I have to focus on, wow, she had that same thing on, or wow, did she know she was coming to church? Why do they have on this, that, and the other? And so it's really about your heart, and people have their hearts in the wrong places when they're trying to figure out why a person hasn't dressed a certain way to be in the house of the Lord, because it shouldn't be about that.
That's absolutely right. I could not agree more. And you've kind of, as we've been talking, answered the question that I'm about to ask, and that is kind of like, where do you get your storylines from? But I think we kind of know that, because it's based on experience.
And it is. And I've always thought it was very interesting, and sometimes when I share this at events, there's laughter, because I don't, think people pay that much attention to it or think about it until the subject comes up. But so I have these 24 books, but half of them are standalones, and I have to do full research for all the standalone titles. I never, ever usually have to do much research for the Reverend Curtis Black story. And so it is kind of an interesting thing that I thought about. If I infuse a certain issue that I don't know about, then I may have to do a little bit there. But for that overall story and the gist of being inside the church and dealing with a pastor and a first lady and the first family and, deacons within the church, or just some of what might go on in the church when it comes to the problems and the money problems and the struggle and the power and the scandal, I know that, and I know it all too well.
I know exactly what you mean. It's again, going back to this notion of perfection that gets in the way. And then you have the other thing on the outside, or even on the inside for that matter. You have folks who are Christians that think because they're Christians that they won't go through anything, which is another fallacy. Yeah. I mean, okay, but because even the Bible, it says in this life you will have trials and tribulations, so forth and so on. So for somebody to think because they became a Christian, all of a sudden life is going to be a bed of roses, that's off base. Because someone thinks that because you're a Christian that you will not do anything wrong, that's off base. Because again, the Bible again says all have sinned and come short of the glory. Okay, right. So I mean, there's a whole lot of myths and fallacies that get twisted into the church. And again, you have the opportunity to put them in story form. Do you ever have anybody within the church who's read your books that felt you were either talking about them or a situation that was going on with them? Or what is the feedback of those that you serve with or go to church with?
Well, it's not even so much that an individual may think that I'm talking about them, but sometimes here in my city where I live, folks will come out to the book signing event, and while I'm signing the book, they'll kind of lean over and say, I know who you're talking about. And so it's like, no, you really don't. You don't. No. And they've just decided in their mind after reading a certain story or hearing about the next book coming out. And so I am very, very clear, which is the truth, that my characters are usually mixtures of many people, all wrapped up in one. And maybe that's why they tend to be so bad sometimes, because they've got the traits of 4 or 5 different individuals. But yeah, people do want to kind of contemplate this whole idea or just kind of speculate, oh, we know who this is. It's got to be this person over here at this church. And, no, maybe it's this one, because remember he did that about 2 or 3 years ago. And I had one situation, and this is the funniest of all. A book came out, just like we're preparing now, on Tuesday. And on Sunday morning, a pastor was caught at a hotel. And this was hours before service. And so everybody knew about it because it was public. And the wife of the pastor and the husband of the woman that he was with were out there, and it was just this huge mess, this big scandal. Well, something very similar happened with Curtis and his second wife.
Right.
And so that was too much of a good thing, so that would have been the year that this happened. So the book came out on Tuesday, and this happened on Sunday morning, and folks were saying, oh, my gosh, this is the story. And I thought, well, how would I have written a book? How would my publisher have gone through the production process and got it into stores nationwide 2 days later? Explain that to me. So this tells you people say things like that without even thinking. There's no way I could have done that. I wrote that book a whole year before this happened. And so it's just kind of interesting to hear that kind of thing.
You know what it is? Because it's kind of like you can go to any state, any city, any urban area in the country that has, quote unquote, the black church. And, if there is such a thing, but, they call it the black church. And the experiences are common. Do you know Pat George Walker?
Yes, I do.
Sister
very well.
Betty? Okay.
Yes, she's wonderful.
She is. She's been on my show. It was some years ago. I'll have to get in contact with her and have her back on as well. But Sister Betty, she's a comedian, and she pokes fun at some of the crazy things that go on in church. And you sit there and you listen to her, and you're like, oh, my God, she's been to my church. Yes. It's kind of like the same way with your books. It's like, wow, Kimberla's been here. But they're just, again, they're common experiences that, as you read them in a story, like, okay, how do we address these issues? All right, if this is going on in my church, or if this is going on with sisters or brothers, such and such, how do we address that? Because, again, going back to Christians, things ought to be done in love. Not from the judgmental standpoint, not from the standpoint, I'm going to tear you down and beat you down because this happened to you, so forth and so on. But, all right, you know what? How do we address that? And that's where the redemptive message comes in. And even if it's the pastor.
Yes, because, again, we all make mistakes. And we can all also turn our lives around. There's no doubt about it. People can change if they want to, if they choose to. And our goal, I think, as a congregation, as pastors, and you're talking about people who need help, maybe they've done something, instead of tearing them down, what can we do? We should ask ourselves, what can we do to work together to help build them back up? What can we do to help them, rather than trying to hurt them in some kind of way with our words? Because sometimes our words can do more damage than I think people realize.
No, they really can. See, back to the examples I was using earlier. And it doesn't take much. There are people who will not step foot in a church door right now because of something that was said to them or something that they've seen in a church. I think there's a quote by Gandhi that says, I love your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. Something along the lines.
I love that.
I'm paraphrasing it, but that's pretty much what Gandhi said. I love your Christ, but I don't like your Christians. In other words, the folks that are allegedly following Christ are not doing or following the tenets. You're not doing what Christ stood for. And a lot of times that gets down into this whole not being loving, not being, it's funny because we get into this whole thing about the difference between discipleship and membership and church people versus, and people often joke, some of the meanest people on the planet are folks in church.
Yeah.
Which is an oxymoron.
Yes. I have met some people who never go to church, and some, I'm sure, that even question whether there is a God, but sometimes they're the nicest people. And I always think that's an interesting thing. That's very backwards, because in the church is where you should know you're going to feel love and compassion and forgiveness. You should know automatically when you walk through those doors that's what you're going to get. But as you said, that's just not always the case. And there is a big difference between church people and true Christians.
Yeah, it is. And I'm, because we're talking church, I keep referencing my pastor because that's kind of like the doctrine and things that we're talking. But he said, you know what, I have never heard, and I have not, even in our church, heard anyone arguing about what can we do to save more people? What can we do to love more? What can we do to help more? He said, but we have argued over how much chicken we going to make for this, and we have argued over the Do-Or-Diddy Club, and we have argued over this bus ride, and we have argued over He said, but those things have no salvific. There's nothing salvific in that. There's nothing saving.
No. And some of those things that you're talking about, they're knocked down, drag-out arguments.
Oh, yes.
People don't even speak to each other for a long time after. Petty issues. And as you said, but, there's no argument over the good that we can do.
Right. There's a movie about Adam Clayton Powell Jr. called Keep the Faith Baby. As a matter of fact, Vanessa Williams is in it, and the brother that plays Adam is matter of fact, I can't even see him in any other role. I'm trying to think of his name. Yes, Harry. That's right. That's correct.
Yes, I saw that.
And that's one of my favorite movies. And there's a question in there that the reporter asked him in terms of, he asked him, Adam, of all of your accomplishments and your business, which one is your favorite? And his response was kind of like, that's like asking me, which child is my favorite? Well, that's kind of like the same question I'm going to ask you. Out of all of your 24 books now, which one, if there is one, is your favorite?
Oh, my gosh. I think I always, and I've said this over the years, and I've tried to still narrow it down after all these times. I have three, but it's for three different reasons. So Behind Closed Doors is a favorite of mine because it's my first book. It's what really started my career and is the reason why I've continued to do what I do today. Casting the First Stone, my third book, it's my favorite because the whole idea of writing about the church and creating this pastor and the problems that go on in the church that so many people could relate to, it took my career to a level that I wasn't even counting on. And so that just became a huge blessing. And then A Deep, Dark Secret is a little bit, close to me because I don't know the Jillian character. She's dealing with childhood sexual abuse, but I certainly know what it's like to have been touched inappropriately between the ages of 6 and 11. It's a thin line. I guess I probably should add a fourth because it's about taking care of a mother, a character does, who has a benign brain tumor, so not cancerous, but still very aggressive, and it goes on to take her life. And I really based that on me and my mom almost from beginning to end.
Wow. And see, that makes all the sense in the world in terms of why they would be favorite. And even if you said, they all my favorites, I'd have been fine with that answer because I know how that can be in terms of being an artist that, I'm a musician and I have a couple of CDs out and somebody will ask me, what's your favorite song? And I'm kind of like the same as you are. There's certain ones that have different meanings behind it when I wrote them as to what would make them my favorite. Have you ever had a situation where you've read your own stuff and said, wow, did I write that? I don't remember writing. Wow, this is really good. Did I write that? Do you ever have that experience?
I've had a few moments of that. Of course, having to go back and read before you're getting ready to go do a reading somewhere, and I'm kind of skimming through a book, and I won't even remember writing a certain line. I think that's what happens the most. Almost you feel as though, where did that even come from?
Exactly.
And then, of course, and so then I also have those other moments where I will read through it and think, this is really awful. And so, you beat yourself up.
Right.
And that usually happens after I've read it 2 or 3 times before I'm submitting it. And I just think the worst of the worst, and we are still, I think that won't ever change with most people, and especially with artists, we are our own worst critic. And so that happens, and then the book comes out, and you get the great feedback, and readers are very kind, and they will tell you that they enjoyed it or that they really, really loved it. But I still will read a line or two and just think, I don't even understand why anybody would want to read it, because I wouldn't at this moment. And so it's the strangest thing in the world to feel that way about something that you've done.
I think in the first setting, in terms of, I don't even remember doing that, or I can't believe I wrote that, I truly believe that's where God is using us as the instruments. In other words, it's coming through us. It's not us per se. It's not Mark. It's not Kimberla. It's God coming through us for somebody else. And that's why it's kind of like when I go back Right. You read something, or I'll go back and listen to something I played, and it's like, wow, I can't believe I played that. But then from a certain, it wasn't. It was God. But
yeah.
The other thing I'll ask that's kind of similar to this same question, because I see you have sold more than 2.7 million copies. Mm-hmm. What does that, I mean, what does that feel like to know that 2.7 million of something with your name on it is out in the world?
It's a blessing, and it's, I feel like it's my being on a journey that I never fully imagined. I knew that I wanted to write a book, and that was late in life. I was 30 years old even before I made the decision to do that. And if you had asked me then, do you want to write more than one book, I would have said yes. And, of course, I was already hoping that I would write the second book. And maybe my goal would have been if I could just write 10. I think that I would be happy. So now to have the 24th coming out, and I actually just submitted my 25th one a couple of weeks ago for January, not ever in my wildest imagination would I have thought that I would see this day come to pass. And so it is exciting. It's a blessing, and I just thank God for it. And when you were speaking about words coming onto the page or in your music or whatever an artist might be doing, and that you don't recognize it when you go back to review it and take a look at it, for me, every day, and this is for any writer or aspiring writer, especially who might be listening, usually I'll get the question, what is it that you do? What's your writing process? And of course, the writing process can be different for everyone. But
Correct.
For me, I do not write a single word without getting on my knees. And so first I will usually listen to a gospel song, then I will read Scripture, and then I will pray. And in my prayer every single time is for God to give me the words that He wants me to say, the scenes that He wants me to write, and whatever it is I need to write to help someone, whether it be one person or hopefully many, that's what I'm wanting Him to guide and direct me with. And I believe that He does that. But I cannot write a single word, a single chapter without asking that, of Him and requesting that from Him.
I believe He does that as well. And again, based on the feedback that I've gotten just whenever I announced you were going to be on the show, I know He does that. In terms of, and again, this is kind of like a similar type question. And interesting, you talked about the writing process, because that is one. I don't have a standard question list because my questions really come based on the guest's responses. But in many cases, when we're talking about the writing process, we'll get into character development and where does your storyline come from, so forth and so on. So that was an excellent point that you brought up in terms of one of the things in your process of what you do before you get started. One story I always share is that my mother lives in Georgia. She's down in Louisville, Georgia, and there's a Walmart down there in a neighboring community. And I know she and I had gone out whenever I was down there a few years ago. And I'm going through the book section because I never go through the store without going through the book section. Even if I'm not going to buy anything, just to walk through to look at the titles. So she and I, we're walking together, and I'm coming across your book and a couple other folks who's been on the show. And I'm literally like a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old kid at Christmas. Mom, I know that person. I've talked to that person. They've been on my show. What is it like for you to walk up in a Walmart or any store and you see Kimberla Lawson Roby?
It's still not something that I think you really fully believe. I mean, you know it, and especially when a certain amount of years start to pass by and you've written X number of books, but it's still exciting. It's still a dream come true. It honestly is. That never, ever changes. With every book, there is that certain feeling when you finish it. There's this excitement and this sense of accomplishment, and then there's still that sense of disbelief.
And I know that in the first hour with Pamela, she announced to the audience that, in a couple of weeks, she'll actually be retiring from the legal field and going into full-time writing. She's going to be a full-time author. This is what you do full-time as well, correct?
Yes, I have. I've done it ever since really the first book, because I wrote the first book in 95, and then when I went on to self-publish it in 96, when those first copies came back and we had a reception, my husband said, I think if you're going to really be successful with this, you're going to have to give it 100% of your time. And I share the story everywhere I go that I thought he was absolutely out of his mind. I thought, okay, he has invested this money. He's borrowed money from his 401k for me to start the business. And self-publish these first 3,000 copies, but now the man has lost his mind because he's telling me to quit my job. And I'm not the risk taker in the household. But I thought about it, and I heard him, and I literally went to work that week, the last couple of days in October. And so I gave my 2-week notice, and I literally have been writing full-time ever since November 1996.
Wow. And the book, Casting the First Stone, someone had given me a copy of that book, and I haven't seen it in years in my possession. It's somewhere in my library, but I can see it. It's in the paperback version, it was a light blue cover with some figures on the front.
Yes, it was.
And like I said, I haven't, it's somewhere in my bookshelf or in my library somewhere, but I've had it since around 2000, 2001, 2002, somewhere around in there. But as we talk, I can vividly see that paperback because I used to keep it next to my bed. I would be reading it at night. I remember the light blue cover and had the characters, embedded within, the light blue background. But I remember that one well, and others as well. And like I said, folks are excited with the upcoming one on the 21st, A Sinful Calling. The folks were saying, I can't wait for the next one. I've read all of them. You literally have folks out there who read 23 of the, I guess Sinful Calling is the 24th? Or is that the 25th?
Yes, I have had some readers who, gosh, in this thing, a lot of things make your day when you hear from readers, and it just doesn't matter what they're saying or what they're talking about, and you're very grateful for that, and it brings a smile to my face when I see something on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, or if I'm out at an event. But I have literally had readers post the photo. They will stack every single book that I've written in a photo and tag me in it, and there's just nothing that gets better than that.
Well, I tell you, in terms of being like an author, I tell folks all the time who come on the show that you really have the opportunity to leave a legacy. And I say that because when we're gone off the face of the planet, the books will still be here. They'll be in somebody's attic, somebody's trunk, somebody's library, somebody's something. And so I've had experiences where folks have said, Grandma left this book and I found it, 50, 60, 70 years later. That author was gone, and yet they still had an impact on the lives. And you all have the opportunity to impact others' lives. And if there's anything about, again, the Christian faith, is that impacting of the life of others. And as an author and with your type of stories and dealing with the social issues that you all deal with, there's no question you're impacting the lives of others. So it's not just about you making the money. You really are changing lives. And
that's my hope. And I can remember Dr. Betty Price, who is the wife of Apostle Frederick Casey Price at Crenshaw Christian Center in California. Have had just the best relationship with them for more than a decade, and they have treated my husband and I like family, as well as do their children, and so it's just been a great experience. But I remember when I first met her, and she invited me to come out and speak to their women's ministry, and I didn't look at my writing in this way, but she said to me, whether you realize it or not, what you do is a ministry. It's writing books, and I don't think I looked at it that way, because I was writing fiction and because I was talking about some pretty hard topics, and people didn't always do the right thing, but they do, of course, deal with the consequences. We do reap what we sow, and,
yes, indeed.
And I make very, very good sure of that in the books. But when she said that to me, it really freed me in some respects, because it kind of told me, okay, it was good to write about some things that people were struggling with, even if it was a really, really pretty bad thing. But it's good to really put out there and to let people know, because what I've gotten a lot from readers over the years was, thank you for writing this, because it let me know that I wasn't the only one experiencing this, and I wasn't the only person going through this particular ordeal.
Absolutely. You went right where I was getting ready to go, and that is the trick of the enemy. One of the tricks of the enemy is to make you feel like you're the only one on the face of the earth that's struggling with this issue, when truth be told, you're not. And there are folks who have, like I was giving the example earlier, in terms of the birth certificate and the marriage certificate not matching up. That's wonderful opportunities to say or to help somebody.
Yes.
And the same thing happens, whenever you start reading a story like that. Okay, you know what? If that character in Kimberla's book, made it, I can make it. You never know who you're encouraging or whose spirit you're uplifting once they get to the redemptive piece of how it worked itself out for the positive.
And that's the thing. I had a woman once tell me, and this is probably my best story of saying I helped somebody change their mind about doing something. A woman sent me a note, and she wanted to know if she could talk to me, but she called me. And she said, I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but it was based on one of my stories that she had read. And there's a radio program, ironically, going on in the book, and so one of the characters is listening to it. And the woman comes on the air on the radio show and tells the host, because it's about relationships and divorce, and she says that, you know, she had an affair, and what she wanted to share with people was to never, ever do that, because her child found out about it, the affair she was having with a man, couldn't take that she was having an affair on his father, and he committed suicide. And so just from her reading that, she shared with me how she had been in communication with another man. She was married, of course, and that it was because of that that she was cutting it off, that she was planning a trip with him, that she was definitely not going to take that trip, and it was all because she was worried about the same thing happening in her life if she didn't get off the road that she was on.
Again, the opportunity to impact lives. So I tell you what, I'm going to do a couple of things that I needed to do for the FCC. If you've just joined us, and I truly hope you've been with us since 6, and certainly if not since 6 and 7:30, because this has been a blockbuster morning. It has been, as they say now, I guess the latest word that has made a comeback is the word epic. It has been,
yes.
It has, everywhere I go, I'm hearing the word epic now. So yes. It has been an epic morning. When you work with kids, you do get a chance to stay up with the times. It has been an epic morning here on the Reading Circle. My guest in the first hour was Pamela Samuels-Young. My guest in the second hour was Kimberla Lawson Roby. I'm going to go ahead and change over in the hour, even though the hour is already gone. I'm going to very quickly give you the weather, and then I'll share a couple other things with you. And then whenever we come back, when Kimberla comes back, I'm going to give you the opportunity to promote, because the book is literally, and that's why we timed this interview for today. The book is dropping in 3 days. Today's the 18th. A Sinful Calling is coming out on the 21st. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then we will be done. And our time flies very quickly. And before we go, let me make sure I tell you on the air, please thank Connie Detman for me. Thank Connie for connecting us again.
Wonderful. Yep, she's just wonderful.
Because I went back in my prior emails from a few years ago, and I contacted Connie. I said, "Are you still with Kimberla?" She says, "Yes." I said, "Do you think we can get her back on the show?" So do thank her for me.
I will relay that message. Yes, I surely will.
Dave, what are you doing?
Just sending a gift to Dave 2037.
Who?
Me in the future. I save a little money from every paycheck as a gift to Dave 2037, so he can spend it on things like anti-gravity boots or a hologram Doberman, something cool like that. I think Dave 2037 deserves it. He worked hard. What are you getting Steve 2037?
I guess I was thinking Steve 2037 would just fend for himself.
Well, all right, but don't expect to be borrowing my anti-gravity boots.
You want to have money in your future? You got to start saving now. Putting some money from every paycheck into a savings account or contributing to your 401k can make a big difference later. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free ideas and easy ways to save, go to feedthepig.org. That's feedthepig.org.
Hey, let's just hope Steve 2037 doesn't get his hands on a cold time machine, because he is going to come back here and knock some sense into you.
This message brought to you by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Ad Council.
The cow says,
I love you.
To a child, it's just something else to play with. Lock it up, because 1.7 million children in the U.S. are living with unlocked and loaded guns. Get involved at ceasefireusa.org.
WPSC, Wayne, New Jersey. On the radio, 88.7 FM. Online, gobrave.org. A tune-in radio station, part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network.
WPSC.
Broadcasting live from Hobart Hall in Wayne, New Jersey.
This is
The Innovative.
I think they're really unique.
The Fearless.
They have awesome variety.
The Kick-Ass.
I love Brave New Radio.
The Sensational.
I've never heard anything like it.
This is the one and only Brave New Radio.
Straight from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center, here's your local forecast.
All right, today we're going to work our way up to a high of 87 with a low of 58. Sunny to partly cloudy skies tonight. Then tomorrow, Father's Day, a mainly sunny sky, high of 91. 60 is a low, clear skies on tomorrow night. And then on Monday, sunny skies, high of 89, low of 65, mostly clear Monday night. Tuesday, high of 90, low of 61, intervals of clouds and sunshines and a few clouds on Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday, mostly sunny skies, high of 83, low of 57, and it's going to be clear both Wednesday during the day and Wednesday during the evening. That is the weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. Well, as I said earlier, this morning has been epic. Had two dynamic guests on this morning, both of them with three-part names. Pamela Samuels Young and Kimberla Lawson Roby. And as I said right before we shared that information with you, Kimberla is actually dropping a book, her 24th title, in 3 days. Let's talk a little bit about that, whet their appetites, and then you can promote in any manner you choose. The only thing we can't say on the air is dollar amounts, but in terms of book signings, websites, how they can contact you, any events, anything else you want the listening audience to know, this is your opportunity to do so.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I also want to say, too, how wonderful for any of your listeners, and, of course, I'm sure they've already heard Pamela Samuels Young talking, but what a truly talented, gifted writer she really is, to be able to write about the issues that she writes about and to be able to bring in even her legal expertise. I mean, it just can't ask for anything more than that. I mean, she is incomparable when you're talking about that particular genre, and we just love her. Even my own book club. I've been in a book club myself since 1999, and every single member loves her work just as much as I do. So I just wanted to say that. And for me, I'm getting ready for Sinful Calling coming out in 3 days, and it will be available nationwide. People can go to my website at www.kimroby.com. You can read an excerpt there, the first 2 chapters of that book, as well as all of my other titles. You can read any information about my events. I'm actually starting out in Virginia and really going through the South for the most part over this next couple of weeks. That's the majority of where my events are.
All right. Well, I tell you what, the same respect, honor, and accolades Pamela had for you whenever she was signing off. She said she was still listening. So, Pamela, and I tell you, like I told her, anybody's daughter scared me.
Yeah,
it really
did. It is. It's really something. Just to think that, that can happen to a child, and how many children it has, in fact, already happened to. But it was a book. I still remember it when our book club selected, and actually I was the one who chose it for our book club for that particular month. But I had downloaded it at first, and I just wanted to read just a page. Just like to do that. Usually when I download a book, that's just what I do, and I know I won't get to it until it's closer for me to sit down to really get a chance to fully read it. But when I downloaded it, and this was on my phone, I hadn't even picked up my e-reader device yet. I had just done it there, and I kept reading, and before I knew it, I was at the end of the first chapter. That's when you know it's a great book.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, just really to the point where you're mesmerized by what you're reading, fascinated that this could even happen in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, again, I wish you nothing but Godspeed, nothing but the best. The fact that you're on your 24th and working on your 25th, we know God is blessing, and He is using you. He is using you as a vessel, as a tool to spread the message. I think the story that you just said about the woman that you stopped from doing something speaks volumes of the power that, Mrs. Price said, it's a ministry. We don't see it as that, but it really is. It really is that, and it does that. It does more than just entertain. It actually moves people to action. Or, because again, we were talking in Pam's hour about this whole thing of self-esteem. You never know whose self-esteem you're picking up, or it's just so many things that go on that's coming from you that's going out into the world. And that's, for people who say, I don't do this for the money, but just the fact that a piece of me is going out into the world. In your particular case, you get a chance to do it for both. You get a chance for that, the money and the piece of world. But again, you're sharing a part of yourself with the world, and it's a part that is changing lives.
Yes, that's the important thing, and that you do hope that you're helping people, and especially hurting people.
Right.
That hurting people are being helped.
Absolutely. So I thank you for rising early with me this morning. The show is being recorded. I will be placing it in my YouTube archives. I will also be emailing you a link to the show. I got to figure out how I want to do this, because since both of you know each other, maybe I'll send you and Pamela the entire couple of hours, and also your separate ones. So maybe I'll work it that way. You get the entire, you'll get both your version as well as the entire show. So,
okay, sounds real good. I'll look forward to that.
All right. So again, Godspeed on A Sinful Calling, and that comes out in a couple of days. Is it coming out in e-reader format too?
Yes, it is. Both will be available
on the 21st?
Tuesday.
Okay, then I will download that next week.
And audio, as well as audio, yeah.
All right. Well, I will be downloading now. And I didn't think I was going to like the e-reader, because I still like my old-fashioned books, but the convenience.
Yeah, that's still my favorite. Yeah. No, I won't ever. I'm never ever going to be at a point where the hardcover or the paperback. Those are still my favorite forms of reading. But as you said, the convenience. So when I travel, that's
exactly. It's like my iPad goes everywhere I go. I mean, I'm kind of like President Obama with that. There's nowhere my iPad doesn't go with me. And so, so I have like almost 300 books on my iPad that I'm never at a loss for reading. But so I will be downloading that next week.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds real good. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for appearing, and have a wonderfully blessed rest of your day and weekend.
Okay. You too. Take care now.
Thanks. Take care.